All right.
What are we talking about? News on top of?
Hi, and welcome to the final edition of Newsmakers Journal of the Plague Year. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Wednesday, December 30th, 2020, 36 hours before the new year, 7 days before Congress counts electoral votes, and 21 days before the inauguration of Joseph Robinette Biden as the 46th president of the United States. And we are talking today about the most memorable stories of 2020 with our all-star panel of top local journalists. Joining me, Josh Molina, Delaney Smith, and Nick Welsh. Thanks all. So I wrote the other day that before long that history departments across the nation and the world will have a major in 2020. People will be majoring in this year because of all that's happened. And the other thing I remembered was that old Zen joke where the pessimist says it can't get worse and the optimist says, oh, sure it can, which is kind of what happened this year. So Delaney, I saw you did your list of favorite stories of 2020. There's obviously a lot to pick from. What were the criteria and what was the story that's going to be most memorable for you in 2020?
I think at least locally on the Santa Barbara level, with COVID and everything going on, if we take COVID out of it, one of the most memorable events for me to cover was both Black Lives Matters marches. I think that those were moments in history for Santa Barbara. We had thousands of people gathering. Plus, a lot went on during that time that I think we've kind of forgotten about in 2020, like with Mayor Kathy Murillo not wanting to take a knee. We had
some of us haven't forgotten.
Yeah, some of us haven't, some of us have. But there was a lot went on. And I just think that the Black Lives Matter movement was really powerful here, and covering the protests were definitely a highlight of my year.
Yeah, it really was an extraordinary turnout and an amazing event. Nick, I haven't seen your list yet. Did I miss you?
I put two stories up. I think I was just being lazy. One of them was sort of a precursor to Black Lives Matter. It was a profile I did on a doctor named Harold McMillan, who was the first doctor in Santa Barbara. And he was a real pioneer for housing discrimination cases. And he went on to help start not Cottage, but Goleta Valley Hospital. But he moved to town in the 50s sort of by accident, thinking there were 4,000 Black people living here, when in fact there was closer to maybe 400. And he, when he moved here, he was given a very tepid welcome, like, why don't you move to Pasadena? Was his greeting from the medical community. But once he decided, no, I'm going to stay here, he really entrenched himself and became a real mover and shaker in the community. And that was a story. I figure I know a little bit about Santa Barbara history, and it was a revelation to me, this guy.
Yeah.
So that was a satisfying story to sort of stumble across.
Yeah. How about you, Josh?
Well, I think I agree with Delaney that the protest, the first one at the courthouse, the Black Lives Matter protest and rally at the courthouse, and then they marched up State Street all the way to the police station. And it's sort of, I've thought about the protest and how it's impacted me a lot during coverage, aftermath, today. And I think that what I think about most is just seeing Crystal Farmer, Seacart, and Simone Ruskamp, just sort of like these young, strong women leading this effort. I mean, there's so many people now who are in on the effort, but on that day, they were incredible. I mean, the energy that they possessed, the confidence, the emotion that they have experienced, that they were able to share through the microphone, and then marching up State Street, and then it culminated in that showdown with the mayor, which I know was like, no one could have predicted it would have ended that way. But you could say a lot about style and whether somebody else would do that or whether that's the most effective thing to do. But if you're just looking at these two young women and what they did, I mean, it was amazing. Like, it was so courageous for them to put themselves in that situation and just sort of lead 3,000 people. That's
Well,
not
and
easy.
putting the event together. I mean, that was a big crowd. I mean,
There was a really big crowd, and the thing that was really striking about it when you're there, as somebody's covered a lot of these rallies, it was not your typical Santa Barbara rally where
Yeah.
you have a bunch of 50-year-olds or 60-year-olds or 70-year-olds sort of getting together before a cup of coffee and going to the farmer's market. This was younger people. It was much more energized. It was extremely disciplined in terms of everybody was wearing masks. Nobody was, messing up or, getting into vandalism or any of the sort of stuff they had been worried about, as an adjunct to the march. It was extremely disciplined, and the energy was sort of off the charts, hot, and it was a really impressive event.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Delaney, of course, when everyone laid down on the street for the period of time that George Floyd had the cop with his knee on his neck, that was really in silence. I mean,
It was really powerful, and it just, like Josh said, it has affected coverage on this ever since, and it has sparked so many more smaller like factions of BLM have kind of sprouted off since then. Like, we had even a week later after that protest, we had 2 teenagers lead another protest that was also so powerful. Thousands of people showed up, and we have 16-year-olds as the head, and they were inspired by this initial protest, and that just kind of kept going. And then now we have Healing Justice SB. We have these different groups. We have Showing Up for Racial Justice, and they have all these different things going on in the community now still through COVID, even though it's been months since this protest really just kind of, it was like the initial start point for this energy.
And Jerry, also, you said that, there are going to be classes on 2020. Well, there can be a class on that protest because the amount of leadership that everyone who was organized with that event showed, you can't teach that. Like, you can't in a classroom sort of say, here's how you become an effective activist. You have to do it. And they did this in a way that caused huge, widespread ramifications going forward. I don't know if they took video or if there's a documentary, but I mean, I'll never forget, Crystal Farmer Seacart with the microphone walking down the street or right on the corner of Figueroa and Santa Barbara Street, and just shouting like she owned the city. And that is powerful. That you don't have to agree with her. You don't have to like her. Like, whoever you are out there who may not agree with that style, but you've got to respect the leadership that they showed in that moment.
But the question now is, now what? And so Crystal and Simone have both left town. Simone has moved to Washington, D.C., Crystal to Germany. They're still involved, but how do you keep a movement going and sustaining? There's issues at the county level and at the city level in terms of civilian review boards and what kind of oversight law enforcement is going to be subjected to at the county level. It's clear that there is not any appetite amongst the elected supervisors, at least, to pursue that line. At the city of Santa Barbara, we're about to go into a long sort of slow slog of defining what size the table is and what shape it's going to be so we can figure out who's going to sit down and then decide what kind of an oversight committee we're going to have.
Yeah.
So we're not really clear. We have done a couple of things. We got rid of the name Sambos. All right.
Yeah.
Sambos, which has always been sort of an embarrassment. And then the longtime Santa Barbans always say, yes, but there's a history there. There's Sam Battistone and, the Bonnet family. It doesn't have anything. And once you have to explain that, it's already too late.
Yeah.
And the same sort of with Indio Muerto, which, there have been efforts over the years to get rid of that name because it's offensive. They came up with Hutash, and there's, of course, divisions within the Native American community as to what that name means and what relevance it has to that street. It almost doesn't matter, if you were to substitute dead Jew for that street, or, dead anything, people would say, no, it's time to change it. And so those are kind of superficial, but significant changes.
Yeah, significant, and the plaques at the courthouse.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
As well. My two stories, one was from the before times, and it's memorable to me only because it was the last time I was out actually covering a story. It was the Women's Political Committee luncheon the Friday after the primary, Super Tuesday, March 6th. But also Christy Smith, who was the Democratic representative in the 25th Congressional District, spoke. And, that was a story that I just kind of let go of. And then it ends up, she's one of the Democrats who lost congressional seats in California. And that's really a story that's been, I think, undercovered, is the success that the Republicans had in the election, below Trump in California. And so that, that's the before times. And then the other one is right after the lockdown started and I had nothing to do but, spend 12 hours a day online. I went and found a bunch of video from China and from Italy about what the COVID thing looked like up close in hospitals and ICUs and teams of doctors, and what people who were suffering were, because it seemed at the time, and it certainly seems now, there was this disconnect between the way we talked about it in terms of statistics and how it worked and all that, and what was actually happening up close and what happened to people who got it. And I think that's only grown, 350,000 people dead in the United States. And somehow we've all grown numb to that. I mean, it's just a number, it seems like. People don't really, is that your sense of what it is, what it's like? Even though obviously our numbers are much smaller here in Santa Barbara, it just seems to so many people such an abstraction.
Well, I think it's really amazing. We have 157, is that the number now, deaths in that ballpark. And that's a huge number by Santa Barbara standards, but we're exhausted. There's something, I think, necessary about denial. In order for the human species to persist, we have to be in a state of perpetual denial. And I got a email from somebody who works at the emergency room saying, in the beginning, we were heroes and we were loved accordingly, and now we're hated. And they're feeling the conspiracy and the doubt, and, the hospitals are only in it for the money, and, all these various theories, you lock down, you don't lock down, you do everything you can, you oppose everything that can be done, and the results seem to be bad no matter what you do.
And the other thing is that it became very politicized, obviously, starting with the president. But Delaney, you covered a couple of demonstrations of denialists, really, or anti-maskers, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what's going on with that?
Well, I think a big part of it, Jerry, is that this isn't something you can necessarily see if it's not happening to yourself or your own family member. So it's not the conception, it's not the debris flow, it's not something tangible that everyone watched happen. This is something that if you don't know anyone personally who has COVID, it doesn't affect your life. So these conspiracy theories are really easy to eat up because you don't have any physical proof in front of you. You're not watching someone deteriorate from COVID in front of your own eyes. So these conspiracy theories are a lot easier to grasp onto. And so people are grabbing onto them, and they're saying that this isn't really happening and that COVID isn't that serious just because they haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that in Santa Barbara, where I think overwhelmingly people, have done the right thing in terms of social distancing and avoiding crowds and wearing masks. We have this, we still have this cultural polarization. Josh, the other big piece of it obviously was the economy, our local economy, and how it's impacted us here, and huge division over that, and whether we were doing the right thing or not doing the right thing. But the one thing that it did do was finally enabled us to close part of State Street to traffic, and that's a big deal going forward.
Yeah, Santa Barbara was able to close State Street, or most of it, to cars. Not most of it, but a good portion of it, because of COVID, because restaurants were not able to serve indoors. They decided to close it and start with the outdoor dining and the parklets. And that was huge, because if you started an effort to close State Street to cars, it would take years, and it has taken decades, and nobody's ever wanted to actually move forward and make it happen. And then the city council was able to do it under the umbrella of COVID really quickly. So, I think just to go back to what Delaney was saying is, we're in the age of the conspiracy theories. I mean, it's the internet and YouTube, and there's all these people who don't have any empathy, who, if it's not right here, they don't believe it, they don't see it. And sadly, they're going to have to wait until somebody like right here dies from it or is deeply impacted from COVID before they're going to believe it. And so that's what we're seeing. The business community tends to be very conservative. They tend to have perspectives about government. And so whenever government decides to set down rules and regulations that affect their bottom line, they're going to be outraged, whether it's COVID or anything else. And so I think that bleeds into the fact that, hey, we're already skeptical of government. There's too many regulations. It takes too much money, too much time to open anything, get anything done. And now you're really hurting us in the pocketbook because, Governor Newsom, we won't let anyone eat at our restaurant. You're only doing takeout, and that's not fair to us. So it's this confluence of these sort of the political and the bottom line and the economic, and they're already predisposed to not liking government in the first place. So it's very sad. It's unfortunate. No one wins. Everyone loses with COVID. Every one of us in this room has had our lives dramatically impacted because of COVID. And we can blame the government. We can blame the conspiracy theory. We can do everything possible to make excuses for why things should not be the way that it is. But the bottom line is that we are dealing with a pandemic, and there are so many people who have died. And, going to your point about, I think one of the reasons we don't maybe have as much empathy is, at least with the county, there's so much control over like who dies and who they are and where they are, that the only way the journalists get it is through a tip, or they know somebody who works at the hospital, or they know somebody who knows somebody, and sort of that networking that gets a story out about my struggle with pandemic. I know Delaney did one of those stories earlier in the year with COVID. So it's hard for the journalists to cover this when there's so much secrecy around the people who are going through it. And I think that's what's lost too, is that the journalists are doing their best to try to shine a light on all of these topics. But, when we're told it's a 70-year-old with underlying conditions in North County, and then we're told, oh, we don't actually want to say they had underlying conditions because that makes people think that they would have died anyway. It's difficult for people to understand and see all that because there's so many layers of protection around the issue.
I think
The other piece,
that's a really good
let
point
me
there.
just ask you though, because the other piece on the economy is, what you cover a lot, homelessness, poverty, and so on. And now, the Congress is either going to send out $600 or $2,000, whatever. But, a lot of people are facing eviction. A lot of people are in food lines. A lot of people are not doing so. So it's sort of the other side of the business thing. Where are we on that?
Well, like everything,
Go ahead.
I mean, it hits
Nick, then.
the poorest people the hardest first. And so people are struggling from top to bottom, and the restaurants are upset. The businesses are upset because they can't open up their businesses. And what that really means too is the people who lose in that are the workers.
Right.
They are the employees.
Yeah, it's
And
really
they're
a
the ones
tale of two
who
Santa
are gonna handle
Barbaras.
this.
It's when you look at who has been hit hardest by COVID itself, the Latino population, particularly up in North County, has been way disproportionately hit for all the obvious reasons. Same down here. And so I think part of the sort of implicit bias racism that is at work, oh, it's Latino people, oh, it's people who are overweight, oh, it's people who are old, oh, it's people who have diabetes, and or they're white people in nursing homes. And so sort of out of sight, out of mind, there isn't a human face to it. And economically, I think it's the same thing. Who's losing their jobs? I mean, Salud Carvajal's office was saying that 158,000 jobs were saved because of federal spending interventions, and that would be in not just Santa Barbara County but San Luis as well. And I think people don't really appreciate the extent to which the bailout has kept the water level below our nostrils, and the way this re-upping of it has been dragged out and is it's so torturous. A lot of people are not going to, even if they get unemployment, they're going to have to wait a week before they're going to be interrupted. So people for whom they're hanging on by their cuticles are going to have to really hold tight, because the way the federal government has botched this is really shameful.
Yeah, and the other piece, Delaney, that we haven't talked about is the schools, which has been huge.
Yeah.
Early on in March, everybody said, well, schools are a big vector. We got to do this. We got to shut down. It was a kind of a mess. The first take out at distance learning, now we're in the second, but there's all this learning loss. I mean, we're really in a bad spot right now with COVID, and it's going to get worse, presumably, everybody says, after the holidays. What's the latest on that? When are we going to see kids back in classrooms?
Well, that honestly depends district by district at this point. So for Santa Barbara Unified, for example, they really missed their window. Now that we are in the purple tier, the most restrictive tier possible, and we are deep into it, there is no chance of Santa Barbara Unified being even allowed to apply for a waiver that would allow elementary schools to reopen. They can't even apply at this point. However, all the other districts that already did that back when we were in red or better tier, they already applied. So there's schools in these other districts, and private schools mostly, they're going to be able to continue to remain open, at least at the elementary school level. And so those kids are going to experience less of a learning loss than the kids in Santa Barbara Unified at this point. And that's just the way it is. There's no way out of it until the county and the region does better. And at this point, the new projection is that that's not the case, and that the stay-at-home order is going to stay in place longer. And we're going to stay pretty deep in purple. So it's really a case of the haves and the have-nots. So kids who are in private schools, who are in those smaller districts like Cold Springs or Montecito, those kids are back in school.
Yeah, Josh, and of course the other piece of it is the politics of it. And I think it's going to be really something interesting up in Sacramento, because there are Democrats, moderate Democrats, who want to pass a bill or legislation, to help open schools. And the teachers union, the CTA, is saying, no, you can't do that. And the CTA really runs, or has run, Sacramento for a long time. So it's going to be fascinating to see. Do you think that in Goleta and in Santa Barbara districts per se, that there is any independence from that, or do you think our school districts are ultimately just going to follow what Sacramento says vis-a-vis the teachers union?
I think Santa Barbara has a bigger issue with pushback from the teachers union than Goleta does. I think Goleta is more positioned and poised to open. They're a little bit smaller. Santa Barbara, there are more teachers and there's more pushback. I know that the teachers union want to be vaccinated. They want to be among the first to be vaccinated if they're going to be asked to go back and teach at schools. I know some people are going to retire early because they don't want to go back. They don't want to risk their health. They have parents they live with are elderly, and they don't want to risk it if they're forced to return. So there is that pushback, and I think Goleta is a little bit less so because they were ready to go and pull the trigger. But you do have these Democrats who are in office, and that's most of them in our region, who are having to choose. Do I choose the union, which is very influential? Well, you could argue, but they do have to locally, statewide, obviously they are. Locally, they're influential. To what degree depends on who you are as a candidate. Or do I open schools because I'm also very sensitive toward the underrepresented, the Latino populations in the community? That's the choice they're going to have to sort of make. And it looks like most of them are siding with, let's open schools, because there's too many kids who are having to learn by themselves at home with no one there to watch them and help them. And teachers, you're going to have to just, I don't want to say step it up, but you're going to have to figure out a way to make it work. I think that's the perspective that's going to prevail.
All right. And then, there were a couple of other stories that happened this year, obviously, in politics. We all started the year, or at least some of us, with the DOS Laura Capps race. That was a big story in the before times, which seems like 10 years ago. And that really aligned with the ongoing conflicts over cannabis cultivation, and then the school board races as well. And in 2021, we have a lot of politics to look forward to as well. But before we go, I do want to present, there's a push nationally to have reporters and journalists identified as essential workers, and I'm all for it, especially for you guys. But I do want to present our annual awards, our Newsmakers Journalism Awards, to each of you. And first of all, to Delaney, wins the MVJ Award, the most valuable journalist. You did it all this year. You did the big stories, the little stories, the Jets, everything that was going on, the hardest working woman in show business. So someday I'll see you again and I can present that.
Thank you, Jerry.
Josh,
Jerry, can we just induct her into the Hall of Fame right now? First ballot.
Sure. And Josh, you were the runner-up, and so you do get a participation trophy, which is Giants hard hat. It's kind of like the participation trophy that the Dodgers got for that cute little World Series that they won with the 7-inning games. And
I'm happy to be runner-up to Delaney, but you can keep your helmet because I will burn that Giants helmet the second I get it.
And Nick, this was the year that you finally won the much-deserved Best Columnist Award in your own paper's contest. And so I have something very special for you. It's a Donald Trump toilet brush, and you can. I
had to bribe a lot of people for that.
It's very good for that particular haircut that you have, that brush cut. So I'll be sending that along to you as well. So thank you all for today and for all year and for doing what you do. You guys did great work this year. And, in our little news desert here, I think our community was very well served, particularly by the three of you and your colleagues as well. So we will be back in 2021 with Newsmakers Journal of the Vaccine Year. And hopefully we'll be able to get back to normal some way. Josh, Delaney, and Nick, thank you so much, and stay safe out there.
Jerry, you too.
Thank you.
All right, take care.